History often says corn ruled the Americas. But that's only half the truth. Long before European ships appeared on distant horizons, another plant quietly shaped the destinies of entire civilizations. It fed warriors, priests, and farmers alike. It survived droughts, famine, and war. It was stronger than corn, richer than wheat, and more enduring than rice. And yet, somehow, it nearly vanished. This was not just a food, it was a symbol, a weapon, and a gift from the gods. Its name was amaranth, and its story is one of both glory and erasure. For centuries, amaranth stood at the heart of life across the Americas. The Aztec, Maya, Inca, Hopi, Zuni, and Pueblo all planted it. In the great valleys of Mexico, fields of crimson stalks stretched to the horizon. Chroniclers from the 1500s wrote that 4 out of every 5 acres of Aztec farmland grew this single crop. It was baked into breads, shaped into sacred cakes, and ground into flour for the armies of emperors. It was eaten by nobles and villagers, used in rituals, and stored as a precious reserve for the leanest seasons. To many, it wasn't simply food, it was the very essence of life. What made this plant so special was its balance between abundance and resilience. It thrived where other crops struggled. When corn wilted under a ruthless sun, amaranth stood tall, its deep roots drinking from hidden water far beneath the dust. When frost or drought came, its seeds still ripened. Every part of it gave something useful: seeds packed with protein, leaves rich in minerals, flowers yielding dye, and stalks that could feed livestock or fuel fires. For native farmers, it was a gift that kept giving, a self-sustaining miracle of nature. The science behind it would astonish modern nutritionists. Amaranth seeds contain up to 16% protein, nearly twice that of corn, and include lysine, an essential amino acid most cereals lack. Its leaves provide more iron and calcium than spinach, and its resilience means it can grow in thin soil with minimal water. Even the humble home garden could produce enough to feed a family for months. Ancient peoples didn't need laboratories to recognize its power, they felt it in their bones and saw it in their harvests. Yet for all its strength, amaranth was never just about survival. It was sacred. Among the Aztec, it was called the grain of the gods. During religious festivals, it took on divine form, mixed with honey into statues of deities, later broken and shared among the people in a communion that bound the empire together. Its presence in ritual life made it a spiritual thread woven through society. The plant symbolized endurance, rebirth, and connection to the divine. Eating it was an act of gratitude, a reminder that sustenance came not only from earth but from the heavens. Across the continent, its significance echoed in different languages and traditions. The Maya called it kiwi-cha, the Pueblo revered it as a symbol of resilience. The Hopi used its deep red dye in bread and ceremonies. To them, it represented the blood of life, the renewal that followed struggle. Each harvest was a celebration not just of food but of identity. The people saw themselves reflected in the plant, unyielding, adaptable, and patient. It was a living metaphor for survival on a continent of extremes. When the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they were struck by what they found. Amaranth dominated the farmlands, sustaining millions. To the conquerors, this power was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The plant didn't just nourish bodies, it united people through ritual and faith, and unity was dangerous to those who sought control. Spanish chroniclers like Bernardino de Sahagun recorded with fascination how amaranth appeared in everything from sacred ceremonies to soldiers' rations. To the Aztec, it was the foundation of both physical and spiritual strength. To the Spanish, it was heresy in green and crimson. Within decades, the world's most resilient crop became a target. Fields once golden and red with its bloom were burned. Cultivation was outlawed, its seeds scattered in secret. Farmers risked punishment, sometimes death, for keeping the tradition alive. The Spanish crown, guided by fear and religion, sought to replace a culture of resilience with one of dependence. Yet amaranth refused to vanish entirely. Its seeds, tiny and indestructible, found refuge in mountain villages, hidden gardens, and the memories of those who refused to let it die. By the 1700s, amaranth was all but erased from the great fields of the Americas. Corn, wheat, and barley, European imports, took its place. The plant that had once fueled empires was reduced to legend, remembered only in ceremonies and whispers. But in remote corners, its spirit lingered. Pueblo and Hopi farmers still tended small patches, passing seeds through generations. They understood something the conquerors never did, that survival lies not in dominance but in endurance. Today, as scientists face new challenges, climate change, soil exhaustion, food insecurity, they are rediscovering what the indigenous farmers knew all along. Amaranth can do what modern crops often cannot: thrive where the earth grows harsh. It is more than a relic of the past, it is a blueprint for the future. The story of Amaranth isn't just about loss, it's about rediscovery. And perhaps, it's about listening to the wisdom buried in the soil, to the resilience written in its seeds, and to the people who kept it alive when the world tried to forget. For the ancient peoples of the Americas, amaranth was not merely food, it was faith made tangible. Among the Aztec, every seed carried a spiritual meaning. They believed the gods had spilled their own blood into the earth to bring this plant to life, making it a bridge between the mortal and the divine. To plant amaranth was to honor creation itself, and to harvest it was a sacred act of gratitude. That belief ran so deep that entire cities paused their routines during the festivals devoted to this miraculous crop. The most important of these was the festival of Panquetzaliztli, held each winter to honor Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war. During this celebration, priests and families worked for days mixing amaranth flower with honey and sometimes with human blood, not as barbarism, but as a symbolic renewal of life. From this mixture, they molded enormous statues of the god himself, adorned with feathers, jewels, and paints made from amaranth's crimson dye. When the rituals ended, these sacred statues were broken apart and eaten by the people. To outsiders it might have looked shocking. But to the Aztec it was communion, a physical connection between humanity, the earth, and the divine. Through this ritual they believed strength flowed from the gods into every person who partook. It was in these rituals that the Spanish conquerors saw their greatest threat. When Hernán Cortés entered the Valley of Mexico in 1519, his soldiers rode in awe about the vast fields that seemed to stretch without end, amaranth growing higher than a man's waist, covering hillsides and valleys alike. But their awe quickly turned to fear. They realized the same crop that fed millions also fueled a culture they could not control. And when they saw the sacred statues of Huitzilopochtli made from amaranth dough, they saw blasphemy, a mirror of Christian communion but without their God. To them, it was pagan defiance disguised as a feast. Thus began one of the most devastating agricultural purges in history. The Spanish did not merely conquer land, they sought to conquer the soul of a civilization. They outlawed the growing of amaranth, declaring it the devil's grain. Fields were burned. Seeds were confiscated. Villagers caught planting it were punished publicly, sometimes even executed. To the colonial authorities, destroying the plant meant destroying the old religion and replacing it with the new. To the church, stamping out amaranth was as vital as building cathedrals. And within a few generations it worked, at least on the surface. By the 1700s, the crimson fields that had once defined the Aztec heartland were gone. Corn, wheat, and barley took their place, each crop tied to European systems of taxation, trade, and control. The sacred grain that had nourished civilizations for thousands of years had become an outlaw. The Spanish crown celebrated its disappearance as proof of conversion and obedience. Yet beneath this forced silence, a quieter story unfolded, one of resistance, patience, and memory. In remote mountain valleys and among the deserts of the Southwest, native families kept amaranth alive in secret. Pueblo and Hopi farmers grew it discreetly behind cornfields, hidden from the eyes of colonial overseers. Among the Navajo, small patches survived near homes, planted with seeds saved in clay jars passed from grandmother to granddaughter. These were not grand farms or visible rebellions. They were quiet acts of defiance. Each hidden seed was a promise that the old ways would not die. For these communities, tending amaranth became a form of spiritual resistance, a reminder that their ancestors' wisdom still had power even in the shadow of empire. Even after centuries of suppression, the memory of the grain of the gods never truly vanished. Oral traditions preserved its name, its color, and its taste. Pueblo elders told stories of the plant that waits, the one that grows even in the cruelest drought, a symbol of perseverance. Hopi women still used its flowers to dye ceremonial bread in deep shades of red and purple, keeping alive a ritual older than any church around them. For the Navajo, young leaves were still cooked into summer stews, a subtle nod to the nutrition that had sustained generations before colonization. Every time these acts took place, history was rewritten, not in books but in the soil. The Spanish had misunderstood something fundamental. They saw amaranth only as a crop tied to pagan rituals. But for indigenous peoples, it was part of a system, a worldview where food, faith, and survival were inseparable. To destroy the plant was to attack the philosophy that the earth and people were one. Yet such beliefs cannot be burned away. Even under foreign rule, the knowledge endured: when to plant, how to harvest, how to use every part of the plant. Centuries later, when scientists began rediscovering amaranth, they found these traditions intact, preserved not by empires or institutions, but by families who never forgot. What the conquerors erased in law, the land itself remembered. In remote corners of Mexico, Central America, and the American Southwest, wild amaranth continued to grow. It sprouted in abandoned fields, between stones, along riverbanks. Farmers who had never been taught its name still recognized it as useful. They let it grow alongside corn and beans, calling it a weed but never pulling it up. It refused to die because it belonged to the soil, a native returning home no matter how many times it was cast out. Ironically, while the Spanish and their successors tried to replace it with corn and wheat, Europe itself began to crumble under food crises centuries later. Famine, drought, and dependence on single crops, the very problems indigenous farmers had solved through diversity, became Europe's greatest weaknesses. The wisdom that colonizers destroyed in the New World was the wisdom they needed most in their own. It would take 400 years and a changing climate before scientists finally looked back and realized what had been lost. Today, historians and agricultural experts call amaranth one of humanity's most promising rediscovered crops. But for Native Americans, it was never lost. It lived quietly in the cracks of empire, passed from hand to hand, seed to seed. Its endurance is not just botanical, it is cultural. Each tiny seed represents defiance against erasure, a fragment of knowledge that outlasted colonization itself. While armies and empires came and went, the plant that once fed gods and warriors waited patiently for the world to remember. For centuries, the story of the Americas was told through the lens of corn, the golden crop that built empires and fed continents. But in that telling, something vital was left out. While maize earned the title of king, amaranth was its quiet rival, a plant that demanded less, gave more, and endured when everything else failed. The irony is that, while corn became a global symbol of the New World's bounty, amaranth was the true foundation of survival. It was the crop that refused to surrender to nature, no matter how merciless the season. Ancient farmers knew this well. They did not think of amaranth as a secondary plant but as a partner to corn. In the highlands of Mexico and the dry plains of the Southwest, they planted both side by side. The two crops were opposites that completed each other. Corn reached for the sun, drawing its strength from steady rain and fertile soil. Amaranth crouched closer to the ground, tough and defiant, thriving in thin earth and dry winds. When drought struck and corn wilted, amaranth continued to grow, its leaves still green when everything else turned to dust. To the people who lived by the rhythm of the land, that difference meant survival. Even modern science now confirms what indigenous farmers understood intuitively. Amaranth requires 30 to 50% less water than corn. Its deep taproot, stretching up to 6 feet into the soil, allows it to draw moisture far beyond the reach of other grains. Its broad leaves capture sunlight efficiently, even in scorching heat, transforming it into nourishment when most plants shut down. It is nature's insurance policy, a safety net against famine. Archaeologists studying soil layers in the American Southwest have found amaranth pollen dating from severe droughts that wiped out corn. In years when maize failed completely, amaranth endured, feeding villages and ensuring life continued. But its strength wasn't only physical, it was nutritional. Each seed is a miniature powerhouse. Amaranth contains nearly twice the protein of corn and offers all 9 essential amino acids, including lysine, an element missing in most other grains. This means its protein is complete, something even wheat and rice can't claim. For ancient peoples who relied on plant-based diets, that was revolutionary. It meant a single bowl of amaranth porridge could sustain a worker through a long day in the fields or a warrior through a march across mountains. Modern comparisons reveal that 100 grams of amaranth contains roughly 14 grams of protein, 7 grams of fiber, and an abundance of iron, calcium, and magnesium, nutrients often stripped away from modern processed foods. And it wasn't just the seeds. Amaranth gave a double harvest, grain and greens. While most grains produce in one season and then die, amaranth offered sustenance from planting to harvest. Its young leaves, cooked like spinach, were rich in vitamins A and C. They provided fresh food long before the seeds were ready to gather. Families could eat from the same plant in different ways: leafy vegetables in summer, grain in autumn. Nothing went to waste. Every part of the plant had value: the stems for fodder, the flowers for dyes, the seeds for life. Few crops have ever matched such generosity. That efficiency gave it a special role in traditional farming systems. Many indigenous farmers practiced a method now known as polyculture, growing different crops together to support one another. Amaranth fit perfectly into this design. Its tall stalks offered partial shade to smaller plants, while its roots loosened compact soil, helping moisture reach deeper layers. Even after harvest, its leftover stems enriched the earth with nutrients, preparing it for the next planting season. The farmers who worked the land didn't use chemical fertilizers or irrigation canals. They used balance and observation, guided by knowledge passed down through centuries. Amaranth was the silent engineer in this system, maintaining fertility and stability across generations. So why, if amaranth was so superior, did corn win the crown? The answer lies not in the field but in power and politics. Corn was easier to process in bulk. Its large kernels could be ground quickly and transported easily. Amaranth, with its tiny seeds, demanded more care. Threshing it required patience, and large-scale mechanization was centuries away. To empires that measured wealth in speed and volume, amaranth was inefficient. But to the people who lived close to the earth, it was perfection, a crop designed by nature for balance, not profit. When the Spanish arrived, they favored uniformity. They wanted fields they could tax, grains they could ship, and systems they could control. Corn fit that mold perfectly. It became the imperial crop of choice, the symbol of order. Amaranth, wild and unpredictable, did not. Its resilience made it harder to suppress. Its spiritual roots made it dangerous to the church. Corn could be claimed by empire. Amaranth belonged to no one. And so, it was erased from history, at least that was the plan. Even as amaranth vanished from maps and records, its seeds waited. Some hid in the soil, others in clay jars stored beneath floors of adobe homes. Centuries later, when researchers began exploring traditional diets, they found the same varieties still thriving in remote villages, unaltered by time. It was a living fossil of indigenous ingenuity. The people who had preserved it were not scientists or scholars, they were families who had refused to forget. Through droughts, wars, and colonization, they had quietly tended to a plant that no empire could fully destroy. Today, that ancient balance between corn and amaranth seems almost prophetic. As modern agriculture struggles with climate change, exhausted soils, and dependence on chemicals, scientists are once again looking to the crops that never failed. Amaranth's ability to thrive in poor soil without fertilizer makes it a symbol of sustainable farming. In trials across Africa, India, and the Americas, it has produced stable yields even under extreme heat. What indigenous farmers perfected thousands of years ago may yet become the model for the future of food. In the end, amaranth's story isn't about competition with corn, it's about perspective. Corn became the hero of the conqueror's story because it could be controlled, taxed, and sold. Amaranth, with its wild heart and sacred roots, belonged to the people. It could not be owned, only respected. And that is why, centuries later, its seeds still sprout in forgotten corners of the world, defying the passage of time. The grain that once fed empires still whispers its ancient truth, that resilience is not built in laboratories or forged in empires, it grows quietly in the soil in the hands of those who never stopped believing in it. Centuries after the Spanish crown declared war on amaranth, the world it once nourished has begun to remember. Fields that had been stripped bare by monocultures are slowly being replanted with the same resilient seeds that once defied drought, famine, and empire. Scientists, nutritionists, and even space agencies now look to this ancient grain for answers that modern agriculture has failed to provide. It's as though the plant that refused to die has been waiting patiently beneath the soil for its moment to rise again. The rediscovery began quietly in the 20th century. In remote villages across Mexico and the American Southwest, researchers collecting native seeds stumbled upon small patches of amaranth still thriving. They were astonished to find varieties unchanged since pre-colonial times. Crimson stalks bending under the weight of countless seeds, the same plants once outlawed for their pagan roots. Interviews with local elders revealed the truth. Families had been growing it secretly for generations, preserving not just the seeds but the knowledge of how to plant, harvest, and use every part. What science called biodiversity conservation, these families simply called tradition. As interest grew, laboratories confirmed what ancient farmers had known by instinct. Amaranth is one of the most nutritionally complete foods on Earth. A single cup of cooked grain provides 9 grams of protein, rich in lysine, calcium, iron, and magnesium, a balance that few cereals can match. Its oil contains squalene, a rare compound linked to heart health, and its gluten-free structure makes it suitable for those who cannot eat wheat. Even its leaves astonished researchers, packed with more vitamin C than kale and more calcium than milk. For a world struggling with malnutrition, the implications were immense. Suddenly, the grain of the gods looked less like ancient superstition and more like lost science. But perhaps even more extraordinary than its nutritional value is its endurance. As the global climate grows harsher, many modern crops are failing where amaranth once thrived effortlessly. It flourishes in poor soils, tolerates heat above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and produces abundant grain with minimal water. Agricultural tests in Africa, India, and the southwestern United States show that even under severe drought conditions, amaranth yields remain stable when corn, soy, and wheat collapse. Its deep roots, broad leaves, and natural resistance to pests make it almost self-sufficient. In the language of modern science, they call it a climate-smart crop. In the language of the ancestors, it is simply the plant that waits. The rediscovery of amaranth also rekindled conversations about memory and justice. For indigenous communities, this revival was not just about food, it was about dignity. Centuries earlier, colonizers had destroyed the plant to break spiritual and cultural unity. Now its return carries symbolic weight. In Hopi and Pueblo ceremonies, amaranth is once again being grown for sacred breads and dyes. In Mexico City's markets, the sweet bars known as alegría, made from popped amaranth seeds and honey, have become both a snack and a statement, linking modern life with the strength of the ancestors. Each bite is a quiet celebration of survival. Around the world, scientists have begun exploring how this ancient crop might feed the future. NASA researchers in the 1980s studied amaranth as a potential food for long-term space missions. Its rapid growth, high nutrient density, and ability to regenerate after harvest made it ideal for closed life support systems. Imagine astronauts tending crimson stalks on Mars, a plant once grown by the Aztec gods, now nourishing explorers of the stars. It's a poetic full circle, a symbol of human adaptability that transcends centuries and civilizations. Yet the most profound lessons from amaranth cannot be measured in laboratories. They live in the philosophy of the people who never stopped cultivating it. To indigenous farmers, growing food was never just production, it was participation in the cycle of life. The soil, the water, the seed, and the hands that nurtured them were all part of one system. When scientists talk about sustainability, they echo a truth native farmers have always practiced: respect for balance. The secret of amaranth's survival lies not only in its biology but in that respect, in the understanding that harmony with nature is the greatest technology of all. Today, small farms from Peru to New Mexico are reintroducing the crop on a larger scale. Governments and non-profits promote it as a solution to hunger and climate instability. In Kenya, women's cooperatives use amaranth leaves as a source of income and community nutrition. In India, farmers cultivate it on parched lands once considered hopeless. In Mexico, schools teach children to grow it in classroom gardens. The movement is still small compared to the vast monocultures of corn and wheat, but it grows stronger each year, like the plant itself, spreading quietly, taking root in forgotten soil. Still, amaranth's greatest challenge today is not the climate but memory. The modern food system favors efficiency, not resilience. It rewards sameness over diversity, profit over balance. Corn and wheat receive billions in subsidies, while amaranth remains largely ignored. Harvesting it is delicate work, and its tiny seeds resist industrial machinery. Yet those same imperfections are what make it precious. They remind us that not everything of value can be simplified or mass-produced. Some things must be grown with patience the way our ancestors once did, by hand, with care, in rhythm with the earth. Perhaps that is the final gift of the grain of the gods. It asks us to slow down, to remember where food truly comes from, and to see survival not as conquest but as cooperation. The native farmers who carried its seeds through centuries of colonization did so because they understood this balance. They knew that every generation has a duty, to the soil, to the seed, and to the stories that keep both alive. When we plant amaranth today, we are not just reviving a crop. We are restoring a conversation interrupted 500 years ago. And maybe that is why amaranth still captures the imagination. It is more than a plant. It is a bridge between past and future, between human resilience and the quiet power of nature. The same seeds that fed ancient warriors may one day feed cities on a warming planet. The same wisdom that guided indigenous farmers through droughts and hardships might yet guide us through our own age of uncertainty. In its quiet crimson stalks, we can see the proof that history never truly ends. It simply waits, patient as a seed, for someone to remember and begin again. So when you see a field of red and gold swaying in the sun, remember that you are looking not at a weed or a curiosity, but at a survivor, one that outlasted empires, crossed centuries, and now offers its strength once more. The story of amaranth isn't just about the past. It's a message from those who came before us, that the future belongs to those who remember how to live with the earth, not against it.